and welcome to Friday at the Manor Friday Speaker Series with seniors and allies. Welcome. And today we're just going to begin. I'll give you an overview of our time. We're going to hear a wee bit from John Philip Newell, resident mystic, theologian and speaker from the Iona in Scotland. And as well, then we'll have our wonderful team leader, Susan Johnson. And then we have, she'll share with us our speaker for today. So bear with me as I share my screen and queue up John Philip Newell. And you'll love him because I've heard him many times speak. I've actually met him in person. And where we are. Oh, one second. Just realized I have to share the screen. Okay. Woohoo.
Welcome to our Edinburgh garden, where I'm in conversation with my son Cameron about where we access wisdom in the midst of the pandemic, and also how shall we choose to live after the pandemic. Each week I've been drawing on teachers from the past and asking if they were with us now, what might they say to us? This week, I'm drawing on the great Celtic prophet of the 12th, 20th century in Scotland, George MacLeod. Prophets, I believe, do two things very well. One is that they announce the sacredness of all life. And the second is that they denounce any sacrilege of life, any injustice or wrong. One of George MacLeod's favorite mantras in his teaching was matter matters, because at the heart of the material is the spiritual. I don't know how many times George MacLeod would have said this over his many decades, but he lived until he was 96. And he had plenty of opportunity to do so, and he repeated these words shamelessly. Certain things need to be repeated again and again because we keep forgetting. To say that matter matters is to say that what we do to the matter of one another's bodies in relationship matters. How we care for the physical needs of those who are unwell and suffering matters. How we handle the matter of the body of the earth with reverence and justice and equity matters. And how we handle the matters of the body politic, that is, how we choose to organize ourselves as societies and nations, matter. All these matters matter. Many of us are living during the pandemic in nations that have profoundly failed to protect the most vulnerable among us, the elderly in our care homes and those who are working courageously to care for them. And is it not significant that the economically disadvantaged are much more prone to this virus than others? The mark of a true and noble society or nation is a society that cares for the so-called least as much as the so-called greatest. A society or nation that is failing to give a priority of treatment to the most vulnerable is essentially a false nation, and it needs to change. Part of what we are being invited to do during this pandemic is to ask, how shall we choose to live after the pandemic? Do we continue to fail those who are most vulnerable? What we do to the physical, what we do to the matter of people's lives, is how we touch and care for the divine among us and within us. If George MacLeod were here today, he would continue to repeat this mantra: matter matters.
Well, thank you very
And over to Susan Johnson, our wonderful team leader.
Hi, and welcome everyone to our Friday series. Our speaker today is Greg Mckinnon, who is going to let us in on the Toronto District School Board's collection of fine art. And it's interesting, I was saying that back when I was in grade 7, back when they had readers, our reader had plates of the Group of 7 work, and that's what put me onto them in the first place. So artwork in schools is definitely a benefit, and Greg is going to tell us about that.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that introduction. And thank you, committee, for inviting me today to talk a little bit about the Toronto District School Board's collection. So I've run into technical problems, of course, because as I told my boss's assistant the other day, I'm more comfortable and know more about 1940s office technology than I actually knew about 2020 technology. So I've got a little bit of a presentation on a keynote format, and then I've got photographs which I'll share my screen with, and then tell a story or that kind of thing. So I guess let me see what I can do here. So if I go over here. Okay, so now how do I get back to share my screen? There it is. Here we are. Share screen. And then I go here. So the Toronto District School Board's Museum and Archives, a journey through the years and the issues, some of the issues. I'll just give you some background about the Toronto District School Board. There's our logo, designed in 1998 by one of our students. And that was one of the first issues right off the bat with the school board. A number of people thought it looked too much like the one of the Middle Eastern countries' flags. And so there was controversy, and the girl was a Muslim student, but it had absolutely nothing to do with a crescent or anything else. She was absolutely looking at the idea of an apple a day, for the teacher, and that kind of good representation of public education. So I tell you, we're fraught with all sorts of things like that. So the Toronto District School Board is actually an amalgamation, and I'm sure that the people here would remember pre-amalgamation when the city of Toronto was amalgamated into the megacity. So were the boards of education. So there was a Toronto Board of Education, a Scarborough Board of Education, North York, Etobicoke, York, and a small one in East York as well, but was run very, very efficiently. There were also two other boards that sort of people don't remember nearly as much. One was called CEFCUT, and that was the Public French Language Board. And then there was also the Metropolitan Toronto School Board, which I think if I move this, I can't move that little bit. Anyway, the Metropolitan Toronto School Board. So I'll start with the MTSB, Metropolitan Toronto School Board, founded in January of 1953 when there was a Municipality of Metro Toronto Act, and it formed a number of metropolitan services. It acted as an umbrella group over the legacy boards, coordinating a lot of hiring activities, financial activities, apportioning different tax bases equitably across the 6 public school boards and then later CEFCUT in the Toronto area. And that's really important because there were a lot of areas that were developing residentially, but they didn't have the same industrial base that the Toronto Board of Education had, for example, or some of the other tax bases to pick from. So the Metro Board would move those taxes around so that the metro area was covered. They also looked after a lot of employment issues. So if Scarborough was looking for a science teacher, and Etobicoke, they had a surplus of science teachers, they could get together and assist with hiring those people. It may have actually been the administrative model for the Toronto District School Board. A lot of people don't agree with that, but that's where I started my public school heritage career, actually. And I saw it, and I saw what they were doing. And it was very similar of how they distributed services across what became the Toronto District School Board. It was a small, efficient administrative board, so that was part of its efficiency. It didn't have to deal with a lot of students. They dealt more with staff issues and political issues, funding issues, and so forth. And it was filled with former superintendents and a few former directors of the area legacy boards. So it was a big bank of educational memory and administrative skill. And it all merged in to create the Toronto District School Board. Then CEFCUT, it's the Conseil d'école française de la communauté urbaine de Toronto. It's a former public secular French school district. It was established in 1998 through a committee under the Minister of Education at that time. And it was to support French first language students. So it wasn't the Catholic board or the separate school board. It was a public school board where the students were studying in French. It wasn't French immersion. It was its own French language school board. It operated until to the amalgamation, and then it was actually merged in not with the TDSB, but with other smaller secular French first language schools and school boards in the southwestern, more or less, area of the province. And then they formed that in 1998, and it's called, it's actually called Conseil d'école Viamonde, and it looks after those French schools. There's very little history of that, but definitely an interesting time. And all of them had fine art, heritage, and archive collections. So if I just go down to Zoom, this is bugging me. No, I can't do it now. Okay. Oh, okay. All of them had fine art, heritage, and archives collection. 3 boards, I just have that in the small print because that's how I ended up getting caught in this job. 3 boards had archival staff looking after collections, and 4 boards did not. The Metropolitan Toronto School Board did not have one, yet I was the professional librarian. And so I was able to work on a committee called the Records Management and Archives Committee, representing at first Metro and then the other legacy boards that didn't have professional archive staff. So for the first few years of my career, I ended up pulling all these things together, including the fine art. So I've got so much to talk about. I'm only going to talk about fine art today. So all of the art that was in all the legacy boards was inventoried, appraised, and in some cases retrieved due to security issues, due to high values, etc. The collection was appraised numerous times, and as recently as December 2018, its value was, and there's a little drum roll at this point, $10.5 million. Wow, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of value. It's fantastic. It's an incredible collection of Canadian art, almost from the very beginning of Canadian art right through. Our collection continues to grow, both by students donating art back into the collection upon graduation and so forth. Also, our staff in a number of our fine art programs are professional artists, and on occasion they will donate materials back as well. So it's got the potential to continually grow, which is really incredible. So things to consider about it, though, because there's a lot of people, and it's a very political position I have, because depending on which way the political winds blow, that's sort of the attitude sometimes people have toward the value of the collection. But as everyone knows, a fine art collection is more of a perceived value, and we can't sell it, and I do not support selling it either. The fine art is held in public trust. So that's a very important feature. It doesn't belong to the schools that received it. It doesn't belong to the principal on behalf of the school. It doesn't belong to the administrators or the director. It belongs to the public. And we are the stewards. I am the steward of that. So luckily for us, the value has grown immensely over the years. Some of our staff were closely associated with members of the Group of Seven, for example. There were a number of directors who were interested in fine art. There was a tradition in the Toronto Board of Education to teach through art, art for enlightenment of students and staff. So people knew a lot of people in the art world, and they got donations, they got deals, just like I work them now with up and coming artists. We'll do different things together, and I'll benefit from it because I'll end up getting pieces of the artist's work. We don't go out and buy a Group of Seven pieces for $175,000 or any of those things. We got those when they were very inexpensive. And one time, the former conservator of the board, David Sauerbutts, was unframing a small Casson, and as he opened the backing and so forth, there was actually a sales sticker on it from the Eaton Gallery. So it was down, it was a way that people bought Canadian art, and it was $50 plus tax, of course. But that's how much that has grown. And when that one was appraised, it was just around the $45,000 mark. So pretty incredible. And also donations. I get them all the time. I really appreciate people donating to the collection, and I feel that they entrust me with their materials, and they really want it exhibited. They want it out in front of the students. So that's kind of one of my challenges. And again, as I said, personal connection with the community. It'll continue to grow in value because, Emily Carr's, Tom Thompson's, all the Group of Seven, a number of other Canadian artists, they don't go down in price, right? There has to be a very big, tragedy to happen. And I was a little bit worried with the pandemic and how it was and going to continue to affect government institutions. And then interestingly, the majority of the value resides within approximately 116 works out of an art collection of more than 6,000 items. So when we appraised it, we had different tiers. So we had the top 4 tiers, and then we had a cutoff of $5,000. So anything that I could roughly appraise as being above $5,000, we appraised with, and there were hundreds and hundreds of them, of course. I always use these 116 pieces to lever support for the other parts of the collection, the people you don't know, the people that have beautiful art but aren't represented in the art market and so forth. It's easy to get rid of that kind of stuff, and so I always talk about it, the collection as a whole. I try not to divide it into different pieces because that just allows people to start to think, oh well, maybe we should do something and sell some of that art. I love doing projects like the partnership we have with the Art Gallery of Ontario, where I was getting a lot of calls after amalgamation, people asking to see the art collection, and it was still housed in a lot of public schools and high schools and so forth, in insecure areas for the most part. But I couldn't really set up an appointment with a member of the public to go into Parkdale Collegiate and go into the principal's office and look at the painting behind his desk. So we had to come up, or I had to come up with a plan. Luckily, the AGO was expanding at the time, and they were looking for a connection to the community and a collection to education. And I needed a spot to exhibit some of our higher end pieces. So a deal was brokered, and they built us a wall, a display wall in the Weston Family Learning Center, which is fantastic because it's a before the gate area. You don't have to pay for it. So the public can enter that and see 13 pieces of art that represent, a wide selection of the types of art we have in two-dimensional paintings, not all of our sculpture and so forth. It's all paintings. They restored the pieces. They reframe the pieces in some case. It just gives us tons and tons of exposure. This led to a curriculum connection with the school board, and we ended up making a partnership where our students were going down there, and it works really, really well. Now, it's been almost 8 years, I think, since that started. So after the first 5 years of the partnership, it renewed. And I would really like to negotiate some other paintings to rotate into that display, because once again, the deal would be that the hosting museum would clean them and reframe them. However, we'll have to see how that changes, because they have some restraints and constraints financially and provincially right now as well. One of the great things about it is our most expensive piece, the Tom Thompson, which is right here. It's actually a sketch. Tom Thompson was painting in the era when painters would travel to areas and they would sketch quickly a painting of what they were looking at. They didn't have the luxury of a camera to capture the colors and the light patterns and some of the feeling. So they would quickly draw these ones. They're often much smaller. And with pieces like this, where you can see the paint layer is quite thick, under magnification, you can actually see that some of the paint tips will be bent over in a print, or in a sketch, I should say, because when they were finished, they didn't really wait for them to dry. They put them back into their cases, went back to where they were staying, etc. And so that's one of the ways. But because all of the Tom Thompsons are bought up by large institutions, there's a huge market in his sketches. And so this is our most valuable piece. It was appraised in 2018 at $7.5 million. So that's a huge chunk of the $10.5 million value right there. It's a beautiful piece. And when this is one of the ones that we partnered with the AGO, and it helps with our insurance. It's risk mitigation and all sorts of things as well. And I was at one of the events we were having with a trustee, and the trustee and I had to squat down to see this Tom Thompson. And she was complaining that, like, why do we have to bend down to see this? And it just sprung to mind. I said, it's all about the children. And I thought, how fantastic, because it reminded me of the old Peanuts movies and so forth, when I think it was Charlie Brown's sister would be taken somewhere with Charlie Brown, and he could see over the counter, but she could only see the front of the counter. And so she would make comments about the beautiful veneer and so forth. But in this case, it's fantastic because the kids are at the perfect height, elementary students, to see this. And so just a nice little touch that we ended up being able to do. Now, this is part of the painting in the foyer of Rosedale Public School. And this is actually done by a painter named F.W. Beatty. And it's called The Four Seasons. It's beautiful. It's very nice. It reminds me of a number of different British artists. It reminds me of book illustrators. And it's a very, very nice feeling painting. This is summer, and it's the Four Seasons, but it's on 3 panels. So for a long time of my job, when I was, kind of promoting it and so forth, people were always asking me about the missing panel. And it was frustrating because it makes sense that 4 seasons, 4 panels, but yeah, it's really large. Do you know what Joanne's here, and she's helped me with it. She's just going to check the size. It's very large. Now it's in the front foyer. It's beautiful, but it's in front of the kids, which is fabulous, but it is open. There's no protective barrier in front of it. There's a small little railing that comes up about knee high or so on an elementary student that runs right in front of these panels. And it's more of a trip hazard than anything else, really. But it shows the time when it went in there, public art and art was respected. And those kids were very careful with it, and they would never think to cross that little barrier. But we're constantly struggling, trying to figure out how to deal with this particular painting. Another thing, John Joseph innocently said that it was a group of 7. And that's another thing that I have to deal with all the time, because we have a wide, diverse Canadian collection, but everyone focuses in on the group of 7. And, I have heard so many rumors, and they've even been perpetuated in the media at times, which is very hard then to say, oh, well, the Toronto Star said this, but it's like, well, they didn't really check everything. So sometimes it's hard to fight those types of rumors that get going. So I wanted to be sure to show you this piece of the mural, just just so you knew. Now the
26 to 1080 centimeters. I don't know.
Oh, it's in centimeters, but it's huge. It's like the panels are probably 9 feet wide and probably about 7 feet tall. Really, really quite nice. So anyway, getting back to the discussion, the collection's based on a number of things: fine art, and that then breaks artifacts and then the archival record. So looking at the fine art, it breaks down into typical fine art, two-dimensional paintings, watercolors, acrylics, oils. There's drawings, there's architectural drawings, and then there's war memorials, sculptures, portraiture. But I just wanted to show you a couple of these, and unfortunately, this is when my technology started to go wrong. But this is a Loring war memorial at Northern Secondary School. Northern Secondary School started as actually a technical school, and she was a very, very well-known sculptress at the time, and she was commissioned to put forth this sort of bas-relief style war memorial. It's really beautiful. It's hard to see here, but these are the names of the fallen that are actually chiseled into the work. Once again, a very small, minimal kind of chain in front of it. I've actually worked on a conservation project at night, cleaning that, and it was really, really quite an interesting project. What else do I have here? Oh yeah, stained glass, tons of stained glass. These are some of the ones at Danforth Technical School, representing various attributes of education, service to the Crown and that type of thing. You can see, there's a graduate, there's a knight, looks like an orator or perhaps a statesman, and then maybe a lawyer. So all sorts of different components, and they're quite beautiful. Unfortunately, you may have heard a couple of Mays ago, at the end of May, there was a fire at York Memorial Collegiate Institute out at Trethewey and Eglinton, and their auditorium and front foyer and front steps were pretty much destroyed. Well, the auditorium was definitely destroyed in a massive fire. And unfortunately, they had a beautiful set of stained glass windows in there representing industry, commerce, social life and so forth in Canada, as well as the military. The front foyer, the steps leading up are 11 to represent Remembrance Day and everything that goes with November 11th. So we're rebuilding that. Insurance is being very, very helpful. It's out of my hands because, rebuilding brick structures and so forth. But now we get caught because the TDSB is not allowed to build auditoriums anymore because of the Education Act and so forth. They just don't fund that type of thing. It has to be a multi-use space and so forth. But the insurance wants to pay for what was there, replacing what was there. So here, the school board can't replace what was there. The insurance doesn't want to pay off on a more expensive multi-feature room. And then there's all this heritage component as well. So we've actually got a project underway to restore the stained glass that was lost in there. I'm working with a woman named Eva Guden, and she's painstakingly going through all the pieces that we were able to recover, or the recovery company was able to recover. And we're mixing in heritage glass as well, so it will look the same. And we're trying to figure out where we should put them in the new rebuild of the school. It was very unfortunate because that school really was proud of its history. It was sort of a center of heritage in the former city of York. It was combined with a swimming pool and a community center, which had a small museum in it. All of those things were heavily damaged by the fire. And it's kind of like people were saying to me, well, why didn't you have it? And it's like, well, it was out and about. It was well cared and maintained. It was documented. It was insured. It was doing what it was supposed to do. And unfortunately, we protected what we could protect, but the building was so old, the fire was so devastating. But very interesting that there are so many professionals in our city that deal with that type of work. This is a painting by, what's his name now? I can't remember. He's in Jarvis. George Reed. Sorry, thank you, Joanne. George Reed and his wife, Mary Grinch, who Reed did these large murals in the auditorium, and I call this built art because it's really built into the structure of the room and so forth. Humberside has this with a Lismer mural from the Group of Seven. Jarvis Collegiate has it as well. They're not really well received right now. because of some of the representation of different cultures and kind of the British viewed history of Canada and only the British view. So this one's quite neutral. It shows the North Atlantic, and he had come back after doing the World War I murals and the story of the exploration of Canada on this much larger mural. And he was commissioned to do these panels for the Second World War. So we did a North Atlantic convoy. This is a black and white photo, but it really doesn't change much. It's a very muted, mundane, dark, depressing mural. And his wife, he actually died before it was finished. He never did see the completed project. But his wife, Mary Wrench, who was also an artist, had carried on, and he had the original designs and so forth. All of his archives as an artist are kept at the Art Gallery of Ontario, if you're ever interested in that. I'll just see what we have here. There's some more of the stained glass. It was a piece that was in our kindergartens. One of our directors, James Hughes, believed strongly in lightening up the classrooms, getting art to the students. And James Hughes was the chief superintendent of the former Toronto Board of Education around the turn of this last century. And at that time, Canadian art, really, Impressionism hadn't really caught up to the public eye and definitely not to the institutional eye. So he started to do the stained glass because it could be positioned, it was bright. It wasn't the dark portraiture or the darker kind of landscape scenes that was in the Canadian art canon at that time. So interestingly, he really pushed this idea of lightening up the classrooms and doing these almost nursery rhyme type scenes. Yeah, and he also brought kindergarten to Canada, and it started in Toronto. And it came via St. Louis in the States, and from there it had come from Germany, the work of Froebels and other early German educators for early childhood education. There's a fantastic story about James Hughes because he was quite a guy, and he was married 3 times. And the woman that he married the second time, I guess it was, because he married his nurse at the end. But anyway, he married a second wife who went to that convention in St. Louis and got all this information and came back as a young, dynamic educator with all these ideas. And lo and behold, the chief super or inspector, basically the director of education, supported her program and instituted it in a number of downtown schools. And it really did take off. And then he married her. So that worked kind of well. I've had a lot of feminist historians come in from the University of Toronto in particular that have looked into that lady's life. And a lot of them feel that she was in a political position to make a lot of advances, both in the women's movement and also the public education movement. And she did not take advantage of her place and time in history because her husband was a progressive. He really did change a lot of good things. And he'd been a direct student of Edgerton Ryerson, who developed the whole concept or the modern concept of public ed in Ontario. So these feminist historians feel that she shouldn't have married him, shouldn't have retired, shouldn't have taken his name, and so forth. Now, she did work and pull strings in behind the scenes, of course, but the people think that she could have accomplished much more if she stayed as an educator and stood alone. So there we go. I am going to stop sharing now because that's the end of those pictures. There I am. So any questions to this point?
Yes, Greg, just a little question from me. So thank you for correcting me. I guess I referred to that as a group of 7 because when I went to Rosedale, they said, "Oh, we have a group of 7 in our lobby." That's fine.
Yeah.
Sort of an urban myth, definitely.
Yeah.
But
it really is. And that's one of the unfortunate things is our pieces are in schools, and
yes.
It's really good when a principal or a teacher or even a student body takes interest in it. But then when that principal moves to another school or that teacher transfers out or that cohort of students leave, suddenly there's not as much interest sometimes. And for example, really our history starts in 1807 with the early foundations of what became eventually Jarvis Collegiate. And the way education kind of worked was quite confusing, and I can't remember now why I just brought that up.
About just the legacy, to know what people know about their art, how those people.
Oh, right, yeah. And so Jarvis Collegiate, I helped them with their 200th anniversary back in 2007. And we had records of their material that had been found at Jarvis, donated to my department, borrowed back for a celebration, and kept by the administration at that point, and a nasty letter saying, why did we even have it? And then that person leaves. We have the documentation when it all comes back again to the central collection. And then for the 200th, boom, it went back again. So that is a big issue. And it's interesting because I've put in 25 years, it turns out, and my boss, Associate Director Manor Gardner, is retiring. And we just had a little retirement Zoom meeting for her. And I recounted that my next boss, who's now Craig Snyder, I'll be reporting to him very shortly, he will be my 12th boss in that 25 years.
Wow.
And actually more than that, because I had 2 more bosses at Metro before I started. But just since the TDSB has been developed, 12 bosses, and I have not changed positions. So I think that's an interesting bit of trivia, but it shows that I have to retrain those people, introduce the art collection, the importance of art education, the importance of this stuff not being for the head offices and the director and his or her guests in a boardroom. It's for the students, right? And the problem is one bad apple spoils the bunch. And so that's what a lot of things happen in schools. And in my situation, anytime I've approached a student about art, they like it. And if they know about it, they're proud of it. And you go to Central Tech, there's a little heritage hallway now. And, I see students stopping and looking at it. And these are photographs and copies and so forth from the 1920s, the 1940s, and they're proud of it. And there was one point, and I'll show you some plaster work later, that was up inside more built, architecture and beautiful detailing. And kids used to hang out and they threw garbage around, they put graffiti on the walls and so forth. And an art teacher noticed when some tradespeople were repairing the suspended ceiling that there was beautiful plaster work up above. So the art teacher talked to the principal, got permission to open that up. And so the students saw all this, suspended tiley stuff. And then boom, right where they used to hang out, they would look up and there was all this beautiful plaster. Well, Mr. Wood, the art teacher, ended up, talking to the kids one day about it, and they were so proud about that. It became almost like their hangout even more after that. And, when I would go to Humberside, I still do it. I haven't been there for a while, of course, but I find a student and I know where the auditorium is, right? And I'll say, I'm looking for some place. It's named after a guy, I think maybe the auditorium. And 9 times out of 10, the kids will say, oh, Lismer Hall. And I'll say, oh yeah, where's that? And so they'll start to point. And if they have to help me sometimes, just walk me down the hallway or whatever, they'll start to tell the story. They'll start to say that Arthur Lismer was a group of 7 member. He was very interested in education, all of these things. And it's because the art has been shared with them. It hasn't been held away. It hasn't been put behind glass. It's there, and they're part of it. It's part of their art as well. So, the risk manager of the board doesn't like that attitude of mine. A lot of my bosses along the way haven't liked that attitude. But you know what? I think it's better to have this stuff out and about. And I don't know what everyone's view is on art, but digital art just doesn't cut it for me. There really is a feeling that I get when I'm in front of these pieces. And I know that Susan, you'd said earlier that you enjoy the group of 7. I didn't like the group of 7 until I started to work at the board. And I really didn't like it at the beginning because it was like, oh, the group of 7, that's all we talked about. And then I got involved in it. I got involved in 2 restoration projects, a Franklin Carmichael and a Lauren Harris. And suddenly I just got involved to a great extent. And I've actually been to the North Shore of Lake Superior, and I've been up around Georgian Bay where some of the other art was done. Franklin Carmichael's from Aurelia in the library when I was a wee boy, because I was born there. There was a huge, in my mind, Franklin Carmichael hanging above a fireplace, actually, in the old style Carnegie Library that was there. So very interesting, and it really motivates me now. And I'm connected a lot with the McMichael Gallery. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll try to share my screen again in a moment. And I'll just point some pictures out here.
Craig,
Yeah,
it's Joan. Can I ask you a question?
sure.
Certainly, Joan.
Thank you. I've been to the Jarvis Collegiate when they did a Doors Open years ago.
Uh-huh.
For the murals that George Reed did.
Yeah.
Are they ever going to be taken down and sent to like a museum, like the art gallery of the AGO or maybe the National
No,
Gallery? What's their
not
stance on it? Because I mean, they're magnificent.
they're beautiful pieces, absolutely beautiful pieces. And I can see why there's concern because it is
Yeah.
representative art from a very particular period in Canadian history.
Yeah,
However, that's an important period of Canadian history, and it's an important that we keep record of how people looked at other people at that time as well.
exactly.
And I use that argument, and it's starting to lose traction, Joan, quite a bit actually, because people just want to get rid of these things. They
I
want to
know.
erase it. And, that doesn't work well when we look back in history. It's better to interpret it. I remember when the University of Toronto took over the old Toronto Board of Education head office, 155 College. Up outside the cafeteria, or inside the cafeteria, there was a sort of murally thing called Cuisines of the World. And they showed different stereotypical images of cultures. And there was one of what a Middle Eastern person was represented as, and they were dressed in a turban-y thing, in front of a fire, and they had some sort of pot. So the Arab student group took offense to it, but they handled it very, very well, and it went through the proper channels. And so some people came over, and I had a lot of information about it, but we didn't own it anymore. And so they could really do what they wanted with it. There was no like fine art lien on it or anything like that. So anyway, I was back and forth. And so I was actually in the cafeteria looking at this stuff with the people. And so we decided to do an information panel and tell the story, and rather than just cover it up or get rid of them all, which I thought was fine. And I couldn't help myself as we walked by the European one. Of course, there's a big fat chef with a white hat, and he's stirring a big pot. And I said, well, coming from European descent, that doesn't really represent me either. But, it wasn't the time or the place to bring that point up, that they were all stereotypes. And eventually they did put the piece up, or the panel up, and they did address the stereotypical nature of all of the pieces, not just focusing in that it was a direct attack on.
So is that how they're going to be using that to preserve the art? Because I mean, look how fast they're taking statues down these days, like
For sure.
McDonald's in Montreal. So is that a way for you to keep that argument alive so that they don't touch the stuff?
Well, I'm trying very hard, and we've determined that the pieces are actually canvas. They're painted on canvas, and then to the wall, and they could be taken down. They need to be clean. They need a whole bunch of different things, but there's no money in the board to do that type of thing, particularly in the political nature of our Indigenous education center and a lot of the work we're doing with our Indigenous students. It just would not fly at the board level to put any kind of funding into restoring that, because I've had ballpark figures of $1 million and to do that work, and that was well over 10 years ago.
So not. I'm sorry to one day I'll Zoom you just to ask you a lot of questions, but not even through philanthropy, like philanthropy. I got tongue-tied, Joanne. I could see me saying that word, philanthropy. You know the word, like a fundraising event.
Sure, it's that works. But with this one, it's just so politically fraught.
Really?
We'll get into an argument. You're subjugating Indigenous people. You're only showing them as a servant. You're only showing them in visually below the Europeans.
Yeah.
You're a cross up on top of that piece. Why is it the highest? They're very hard questions to address now because of the aggressiveness to that. It used to be not pretty easy, but it was a good tactic. It was a good way to keep the pieces. However, I had a case in the board where I got called about a totem pole that was in Scarborough, the former Board of Education for Scarborough. So the principal didn't know what to do. So he called me. I did some research with a friend of mine who's in the archival business in Scarborough, and he was alive at the time, and he remembers it was a totem pole that was carved by an elder or like a spiritual wood carver. They had a big event. It was the real deal. And so I asked the Indigenous community to, like, what should I do? And without even looking at the photographs, they said, oh, that's just fake, get rid of it, right? So I had to present the case that it was actually done by other people that weren't Cree, that these people are. And it was really, something sacred that we should keep. And of course, she was used to having a lot of, fake stuff, just, kitsch that people had done. Oh, this is a indigenous totem pole and that kind of thing. So even a community that we're trying to protect can sometimes make that mistake as well. But the thing is, we have to partner with a very large group, or we have to raise a lot of money to get to that $1 million mark. And
Wow.
other projects, kind of like the York Memorial Fire one,
Yeah.
which people are trying to raise money for to save the stained glass and the heritage that was in the front foyer.
So it becomes who you prioritize. What do you prize is significantly more important over the other? Like what do you value more from a price value? Does that become part of it too? Is the price tag value?
Yes and no, because once again, murals and mural cycle type artwork, it's very hard to appraise because part of its value is in it being a mural. And there's very few places that will buy a mural from another institution or another spot to put up. Usually they're purpose built and so forth. So there's a perceived value, but I'm a personal property appraiser as well. And I dabble a bit in fine art, but due to conflict of interest, I kind of stay away from the art. But the concept you use is a willing buyer, a willing seller, and a fair market. And there is really no fair market or a willing buyer in these cases. There have been some cases at the National Gallery level and heavily funded or better funded institutions to do that type of work. And once again, it's which way the wind blows. Like somebody was talking to me about RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, getting involved and this is part of their heritage too, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So I pitched that up the chain and it was snuffed right away because at that point, the school board wasn't working with the Royal Bank of Canada. We have preferred vendors, we have preferred service providers, all of that sort of stuff that we have to adhere to as well. So even if the Royal Bank wants to give me $1 million, it would be very difficult to stick handle it through the bureaucracy that exists. But having said that, I'm also working on a huge donation of textiles from a teacher, and she was in our continuing ed department, but she's had a whole career working in textile art. And I'm working with her. She's very excited. And so with her donation, I've talked about exhibiting it. And so she's actually turning me on to a whole bunch of people in the weaving community of Toronto. Who knew? But I have to open up an exhibit at Central Tech eventually. And weaving can be considered a technical art as well as a fine art. And some of these people actually taught at Central Tech years ago when there was a weaving program.
Wow.
So, there's all sorts of different things that come into me. I received a 1,000 frame plus donation fairly recently, empty frames. And, Joanne and the fellow that works for me, they were laughing because they were like, well, these are empty frames. How are we going to do stuff? And I had to pat myself on the back because I think I'm the only guy that can sell the story of an empty frame, right? Because this once housed a group of 7 pieces and go on and on and on. And, there's a history to these frames because they were purchased actually, what's his name? David Thompson of the Thompson Empire and so forth. Yeah. His father and David have collected, extensively over the years. And often in auction houses, when they're doing groups and so forth, they'll reframe them into kind of a very neutral frame. So it doesn't take away from the art and they can kind of compare them easier. And so what you do when you buy this expensive piece of art, you take it and you have it reframed. Yeah. So I have a colleague that is an art restorer and he works at that level. Very, very, he's probably the best in Canada, Laszlo Sear. And so anyway, he was tasked with getting rid of David Thompson's part of his frame collection because he has frames that go back to ancient times. And so he sort of collected, he's got all this extra fluff. So once again, I'm moving into, a part of my operation into the art building at Central Tech in the next few months. And, I was thinking here, now I can use these different period frames to partner with the students. So the kids are learning about, 1970 artists or whatever. Then I can provide exhibit space and 1970 frames to put their art in. And, everyone's probably scratching their own frames, but frames really, really do make and break pieces of art. It really does show different cultural tides and society tides and so forth. So I actually have to go there. I have to rent a van and go down, and I think there's 350 more pieces to pick up. Yeah. So yeah, seriously, because she helped me the last time. Yeah, so I try to make lemonade out of lemons all the time. And so I'm sort of happy that the textile opportunity came
Yeah.
forward, because that will sell a little bit better for the exhibition. Because I really don't want to have to, explain 12 empty frames, right?
No.
I could probably do 1 or 2. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to try to get to these photos. I wonder if I can do it kind of that way, and then I can still see people. Okay. So is this okay with everybody, or am I?
Oh, yeah.
This is
This is
wonderful.
great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay. So is that the unknown one? Okay, so in 1940, they didn't have screen things, but they did have carbon paper. Let me no. I'm just trying to get to this. So if I know what I'm doing. Okay, here we go. I don't know why that's there. So if I disappear, there I am. Share screen. So are we sharing screen?
Don't see it yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I see me and then a whole bunch of inboxes. So I'm going to close that.
So what you sometimes have to do, Greg, you have to open it up on your desktop, and then you go back into the Zoom platform and then share it. Then you can find it, because it's a bit like trying to find Andromeda Galaxy in the in the night sky. Sometimes.
There you go.
Oh, there you go. Rock and roll. Okay.
You know what, John Joseph? I just kept pushing buttons while you were talking.
That's good. That's
I
good.
don't have my glasses on. I mean, it's too. So it's okay. So here we go. Okay. Let's bring this one up. And of course, now these aren't the best pictures because I didn't have a chance to get to originals. So these are from some secondary sources I had. But this is a painting called Rossport, 1921, and it's painted by Group of 7 member Lauren Harris. So it is in the TDSB corporate collection, and it was purchased by Central School of Commerce back in the day. They had a very great art collection program, and there was a fellow there, just a little sidebar, who was a English teacher, and he loved drama. His name was Herman Voden. Voden was a member of the Arts and Letters Club where the Group of 7 hung out. He actually hung out with them. They did social things, and he went to openings and everything else. Herman was trying to do what the Group of 7 did with fine art in Canadian drama. So he was trying to bring this whole national identity, this struggle against the wilderness and taming it and so forth in Canadian works of drama. So do you know Herman Voden's name? Didn't work. But interesting guy. And as a result, he got a lot of really high-end pieces for that school's collection. So an interesting story about this piece is I've just recently got it restored. It cost, what was it? $7,000? $7,000 to restore it. Once again, no restoration funds. So I got a cold call one day, an email from a man who asked me if I knew anything about a painting by Harris named Rossport. And I said, well, yeah. And it turns out that he is an art collector, and he actually sits on the board of directors of the McMichael Gallery. And he's a big finance guy at Scotia McLeod. And he had purchased the sketch of Rossport. So remember I talked about the Tom Thompson and how the group and Tom and Emily, their sketches are very valuable. So he purchased a sketch of this, and he had tried to track it down. Now, not all painters do a sketch and then do a final painting. So he was bumping up against a lot of dead ends. And he talked to Charles Hill, who's the curator of the National Gallery, retired, and he asked about it. And I've had dealings with that curator as well as my predecessor. So he was like, oh yeah, the Toronto School Board has it. So that's why this guy called it. So one thing led to another. He was so excited, he paid for the restoration of it. Then I jumped in and we were able to broker a deal to put it in the McMichael Gallery for the centenary of the Group of 7. So it opened right around the same time that the first Group of 7 exhibition opened way back in 1920. It was really the first time that this painting had been reunited in its sketch in almost 100 years, because it was painted in 1921. And it's kind of a neat piece because down in the lower left corner, I think it is, he actually signed it. Harris stopped signing his pieces shortly after this because he was from a wealthy family, and he wanted his art to be judged on its art value alone, not on, oh, you know, did you see the latest Harris piece, that kind of thing. So it's kind of an interesting piece, valued at $850,000. So kind of neat.
So where is it right now?
So right now it's hanging in the McMichael Gallery in the midst of the Group of Seven exhibition that they have. And it's in the end of a beautiful hallway. So you walk down towards it, you see the lovely piece, and then Carl Spiess's piece is right beside it. The smaller, the Scotia McLeod fellow who had the sketch, it's right beside it. So boom, then the pandemic hit and none of our students went. So I don't know how to get back now. Oh, I did the wrong thing. Sorry, guys. Oh, now I'm just going blind into it. I don't know what I'm going to show you. Jackson, this is J.E.H. McDonald, another member of the... Hmm? Oh, you don't see anything? Okay.
It just shows your screen again.
Again. Okay. Do you see me?
I see you, but not the screen.
You see art?
Nope.
Why is it not showing? So, do you want to tell them about the trip? Well, I figured this out. Joanne and I were lucky enough to go up to Rossport actually and stand right at the location where Harris had painted that from. Very, yeah.
Oh.
It was very cool.
Are you going to start? Then I'll talk.
Sure.
So when you got to turn your volume down. So when we were there, this was 2 summers ago, I think. We went on this wonderful road trip. We came to this end of this road. There was a train track. Honestly, nothing. It would appear that nothing had changed from the time when the piece was done, because it was almost exactly the same. You could see very clearly the landscape was unchanged. The building, the little sort of barny, sheddy thing that's in the foreground there, was almost like it was so similar. It was obvious that this was the location where he had stood to do the sketch and to do the final piece. And funny enough, there was, I mean, it's the North Shore of Lake Superior, so people are, you know, quite dispersed. And a dog came running up to us just out of absolutely nowhere and greeted us. And it was the most interesting thing, followed shortly thereafter by a gentleman in a sort of a weather-beaten hat. He was like a caricature out of some old-timey movie or something. Anyway, now you're seeing the sketch and the painting together. The painting, of course, that is in the TDSB collection is the large piece, and then the sketch that Carl Spiess owns is this one that Greg is focused on right now. I'm going to mute again.
There. So I've just, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Oh, you may have to put your volume on.
Can you hear me? Okay. So if you look, and it doesn't really matter, there's one difference in there, which was changed in the final one, and it actually adds a huge amount of difference. And it's, where's, you can't see it well enough, but it's right in here where he extends a line, and it's like, wow, it's right in this area, right, that little piece right there. And you know, you can see why the guy was a master. He really knew what he was doing. That's foreground stuff. This is the stuff that kind of drove me nuts about the Group of Seven, right? Like, oh, okay, I understand. It's, you know, the landscape and you know, but that's very similar to what it looked like, if you can believe it. Because I was talking to that man that Joanne was just referring to, and he was saying that because we had a great big foam core mounted reproduction of this life size, and we were holding it up and everything else. And so he told me, just squint your eyes. And as soon as I squinted my eyes, you could see all the wildflowers and the little bit of rock and gravel that was there. turned into that sort of blurry nature. Really fantastic. I've got a whole bunch of photos I can show another time. I could do a whole 2 hours on just this trip, but you can see the background here, which I've always thought was a big chunk of land, right? But no, it's a series of islands. And even when the old man pointed and said, "Oh yeah, and you can get around to see up the island," I'm like, "What?" And sure enough, it's all open in there, and I can recognize it because of the color change and the depth that he was working on there. Now it is private property where that is, unfortunately. So we weren't allowed to, do anything really, but take photographs and act kind of crazy for a bit. But there was a project going on. There it is there. So we were standing just over here. Can you guys see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, we just cruised to a stop here and boom, there it was. It was really crazy. And what's interesting is there's like 2 sort of like temporary shed-like buildings in the same spot. So I don't know if it's the same property owner, but at least they've kept up with the times and they have a nice wooden one there now in the foreground. But that's Rossport, a very, very small town. We were feted on this trip everywhere we stopped. And so we were invited out to a big dinner at this small restaurant. And I was told that there was going to be a member from the, what was it called? Well, it's the Thunder Bay and North Shore School Board. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I'm in this little backward place and everything else, I wonder what teacher, whatever, maybe, technical tradesperson, whatever. And so sure enough, we have the dinner and the guy sits right beside me. And we get talking and, he just looks like a regular guy. So, "What do you do at the board?" He goes, "Oh, I'm their director." And my jaw dropped, right? And it was like, oh my gosh. And he turned out to be a really, really good guy. Unfortunately, I was carrying around a small little figurine and we called him, what was his name, Mr. Wall? No, Mr. Schmidt. And he was just like a little play toy, but it was very, very realistic. And I'd found it one day. And as a joke with my kids, to get them interested in photography, when we were out taking pictures, I put Mr. Schmidt into the photo somewhere, and then they'd have to look at the photo to find Mr. Schmidt. Sometimes I wouldn't put it in there and they'd have to look at the photo and so forth. So as a joke, Mr. Schmidt looks a lot like the former director of education, John Malloy. And so everyone was having a great time because, we'd get all set for this fancy portrait and then I'd put Mr. Schmidt into it, right? And here was the director of the McMichael Gallery, contemplating the vista of Pick Island. And, it was really beautiful. And, one of Harris's well-known pieces. And Joanne, to her horror, looks and sees me in the corner with a camera trying to hold Mr. Schmidt in the foreground. So it looked like he was standing on the top of Pick Island. But I did take it seriously at times. But when we were in having the dinner, the guy talked to me and he said that he knew John Malloy, my director. And so we decided to get a group photo. Everybody gathered at the end of the table and the waitress was going to take the picture. Everybody says, "Wait, where's Mr. Schmidt?" But, I'm trying to be Mr. Mature this time. And of course I have to go back, grab Mr. Schmidt, put him in the foreground of the photo. Everyone's happy, snap it. So we go back, I sit down beside the director again, and he goes like, "What's the story with Mr. Schmidt?" So I explained the process I like to do, not mentioning my director. And he leans forward to me and he says, "It looks a lot like John," right? He knew him on a number of different committees and stuff throughout the province. So I never brought that up in my official report to the school board, but it was kind of fun. Okay, so if I go back here, so did I show you this one? This is myself and Carl from Scotia McLeod, the benefactor of cleaning and restoring this painting and getting it into the McMichael Gallery. And that's his little piece there, his sketch. And it's funny because he talks to me like I own this $850,000 painting, and I don't. You guys own it, so right. I always represent it well, but I always make it very clear, like I have to go through a whole process all the time with this kind of stuff. So, and here I just checked in on Carl and his wife. What's her name? Catherine? No, Jennifer. Sorry. Really nice couple. Really dynamic. This was a virtual poker game that he and his wife had organized, and I do not want to play poker at that level with his friends, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's see some other stuff here. This is a bit of a wavy reproduction. The piano's not nearly that warped, of course, but this is a piano that's in the collection, an artifact. Beautiful piece. It had come through our deaf and hard of hearing program back in probably the 1940s at Clinton School. It's kind of a salon piano. You can see it's styled on an upright baby grand. The keyboard's the same, or the mechanics inside is the same, but you could fold that top down and it became a functional table, rectangle table. Beautiful sound. Play it very, very infrequently because it's all original parts. That's detailing on its leg. And it just sort of shows like the type of extra work that went into things. The piano itself is I don't know the history. I don't know how it got to the school. I've looked it up in the minutes. I've recorded that it showed up at the school, but I don't know who paid for it. I don't know who donated it. Was it a teacher, whatever? Because the students, because they couldn't hear, but they could sense vibration, the teacher would have them put their arms and hands on the top of the thing, the back, so they could feel the vibration. And some children would go in underneath and feel it. So they kind of got the gift of music. And talking about rumors, we had a very big media event one time, and you know, my superintendent at the time, very nice guy, had done an interview that I wasn't a part of, and it was a busy day. So then I'm in here describing this piano and showing it to the news crews who were filming all this stuff, and there's a little crowd of bystanders and so forth. And then someone says, "Well, where's like the big dip where the deaf students laid so much that they actually warped the wood?" So, and I'm like, well, there isn't one, right? And there was a small little dip down that was due to fluctuations in environmental conditions, so the relative humidity. And so wood expands and contracts. So there'd been a little tiny expansion and contract. So there's a crack. But John somehow had gotten the kids putting their hands on that to this little weird divvy thing, to suddenly now I'm explaining to Global News, CTV News, CBC, a radio guy, you know, and I can't embarrass my superintendent because he's standing right there listening, right? But it was one of those, that was the worst situation of having to untie a rumor in that situation. But I think I did it because I still have the job, so. All right, what do I have? Oh, that's the leg. So this is another piece in the collection. It's the former Toronto Board of Education's dais. I actually took this apart when we relocated a number of years ago and rebuilt it in my location at Finn Avenue over in the old Eastern Commerce. It's in a modern classroom environment, but we did what we could to make it beautiful. And now we have to move it again when we're relocating to Central Tech in the next couple of months. So that's a big deal. And you can see that it's really a testament to the kind of temple of education concept that a lot of educators had in the public board of education. And I think probably everybody knows here I'm a Freemason, I'm a Masonic man, and that has so much Masonic connections and so forth in it. It's really quite surprising. And the room that it was originally housed in, where it's photographed here, the way that the stairs work is also symbolic to Masonry. The way that the room was configured, the building was situated, so all the activity was north-south. And this room, which was the boardroom, and you could argue that the most important room in a board office is the board, the room where all the decisions are made and so forth. So you go down these corridors, and then all of a sudden one room turns and you go in and it's east-west. This is behind you when you walk into the room. Most rooms, you'd lay that out to see it as one of the first things because of its grandeur, but it's situated in the east, which is another Masonic reference where the worshipful master of a lodge sits. And so this building is even a parallelepipedon, which is an antiquated architectural term to discuss the shape and size of a building and a room. So this is a parallelepipedon, and it's a story and a half. So it actually has a gallery up where people could look down into it. So I'm on ground level, but it's really quite large. And I've had men that were also Masonic people come in and go, "Whoa, this looks like a lodge room." And people have come in and said, "Oh, it looks like a church," or kind of looks like a courtroom and so forth. And this one was specifically designed, I'm sure, to replicate that, because the man who was in charge of constructing and designing the building was a Mason. The director, what was the equivalent of the director of education at the time, was also Mason. And so I think that they were putting it in not as any secret thing, but just for the people that were in the know, that because Masonry was very, very big then. lots of places you couldn't get jobs unless you were connected into political, parties and so forth. The Orangemen and the Anglican Church. If you were the member of all three of those, you got places in the city. If you weren't, sometimes you didn't. And it was definitely happening in the school board. And James Hughes was both a huge Orangeman and a Mason who was supervising this above the architect. So I think they put it in just as a little friendly reminder, kind of hidden in plain sight. I didn't always tell that story, and I always had to depend who was in the crowd when I talked about it. Okay, so what's back here? Okay, so this one, we have portraits. We have so many portraits. And can you see that guy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have tons of portraits, as I say, and we've got lots and lots of interesting people captured, and we have a lot of different artists that are captured. So this fellow, Robert H. Eldon, was basically the founder of commerce education in Ontario. Really hardworking guy, really nice guy. But we are the most diverse school board, the largest school board in Canada, the fourth largest in North America. We come out of a British public school culture. When it was all set up in 1847, Canada wasn't even developed. All the people that worked on the development of all these systems, and Ryerson himself, were all British subjects. So it goes to show that they were following a model, but that doesn't reflect our school board now. And so I like to say we've got a lot of portraiture of old dead white guys, and there's value in it, but who wants to see that, right? Like there's not a lot of story you can tell about that. And it's interesting because we've had women in positions of power for a long time in the school board. We've had people that were sitting on the board of trustees as property owners before they could vote in other parts of the political process. And so we've got portraits of principals and superintendents and current directors that were female as well. But if I called up a superintendent or a male trustee today and said, "Oh, we're going to set up for a very official portrait for tomorrow," he would come down and look like this. Most of them have conservative haircuts. He would definitely wear a suit and tie. There's no real zing to that. He would look almost the same. And in fact, the guy I'm thinking of in my mind, he always wears a three-piece suit now because it's popular again. However, if you asked a female trustee to come tomorrow, she would come with probably a more stylish hairstyle, most likely with jewelry, where you don't see any jewelry on this guy except perhaps a ring. There'll be earrings, a little bit of necklace, and their clothes will represent the time a little bit more, because at that time, that level of society woman would care about what she was dressing and so forth. So I think like nowadays they would kind of look nice and they would come that way too. But back then they were doing the same thing way more than men. So every once in a while I get people, interested in the portrait collection, and I kind of have to zing them that, like, look at that guy. Like that's a principal of a high school, and that's what they painted for him on his retirement. Like, it could be, actually, maybe he was a Mason. There's another guy with the academic robes, and there's one that's a charcoal sketch. So, a mellower kind of guy. Now, this one I do have, there's portraiture busts. Oh, there's that fellow. I have this one, I think. Yeah, I straightened it up. So there it is. So Wiley Greer painted this, and it's a woman named Ada Berger, which is just hilarious when you're trying to explain that to kids. Ada Berger. We never really got past that in the talks. But there you go. Look at that compared to that dreary old man that we just saw and I kind of kicked around. Look at her hair, look at her glasses, look at that necklace, look at the robe, right? But not nearly as prominent as the men's robes and so forth, a much understated, but I don't know, it just shows a lot more. So we sometimes get art historians that like to look at these because it shows more of a slice of the culture at that time. I thought I had another one too.
Well, you did too.
That I had up. It might be in the other ones. So let me just quickly go through these guys. These are some of the panels from the Lismer Memorial or Lismer mural at Humberside in Lismer Hall, their auditorium. This was designed and painted the mural for their old school, and they rebuilt the school and they took down this mural, but they didn't put the mural back up. So the mural was in different pieces for a number of years, and a man, he was definitely not mellow, named Mel Grief, really nice guy, dedicated to Humberside. He worked so hard to get all of the pieces back together, and he did it. But now we're dealing with, this is now slipping in all these frames. I'll show you a composite photo in a moment, but they're all sort of going down. There's bagginess, there's some cracking of the paint layer. There's a number of different things that need to be attended to. But once again, the scale of it would be so expensive. And really, do they want to spend money, our board, with this type of representation of an Indigenous person, this British person, higher, the flag higher than everyone else, and all of that stuff? Be a tough sell. It's a tough sell not to have them torn down even. So you can see again here, although people at first and in the old times would think, oh, the Indigenous community is represented. Well, that's not how they were dressing, most likely. And once again, we don't necessarily see it with using the Western art lens that there's anything wrong with that photo. But in other types of analysis of that, you can look at the people that are standing. They're more active. They're clothed. They're above the other people. These people are sitting down, and there's even an animal beside the one guy. So there starts to be these subtle kind of messages that the Indigenous community and other communities that were repressed by the British too. I tried to say that sometimes, and definitely can't say it anymore, that the public school board repressed and did all sorts of nasty things to everyone equally. If you weren't, they were trying to make little models of the British citizen. So, Jewish people, Polish people, all sorts of New Canadians, Indigenous people, French speakers, all sorts of different people. If they didn't fit the mold, it was difficult. So it's nice to see that it's changing, because our student body certainly has changed. There's another one there. And these are called dados down in the bottom, and they're actually separate panels. And there was one in the other. That was the last piece that Mel was able to gather. And they've been used, some of these, as backdrops in dramatic presentations at the school, just rolled up and found in the storage room at the drama room. One of these dados had been given to a contractor who had worked on the building, and as in lieu of payment, and he took it and went out west, and the part he got was a bunch of French explorer names down below, and he didn't like French names, so he actually painted over them and put in English sounding explorers names. And it didn't really matter, because they were his, and it was down at the bottom, and it wasn't part of a larger piece. He was the only one that didn't cooperate with the project that Mel Grief got underway, and he wanted to sell that piece on the open market. And Mel was meeting with people who had collected these things and was saying, oh, what, that's a missing piece, 3 of that we need. And most people understood that there was a greater good involved, except this contractor, and he refused. He wanted to go out into the open market. Well, Mel had made such a splash in the art world and so forth with collecting the other pieces, and also the little bit of a bun fight he got in with this man, that when it came up for auction, no one bid on it. It was a representative of Mel who ended up bidding on it, and they kept the price down low. And it was eventually paid for with a Trillium grant in behind the scenes somewhere. So interesting story, most definitely. Yeah, there's another little piece. Okay, so here's where the balcony of the old auditorium entered into the mural. So you see some people down below. The balcony would have been there in the middle, and then you see the top of the landscape. Now, throughout this whole portrait, and there it is, or this mural, there it is, different people's faces, just like Lennox, the architect of Old City Hall, put supposedly different people's faces into the gargoyles and so forth. Lismer did the same with different people in the painting. And there was a student involved. I think this guy in the pink one right over here. And I think it was this fellow, and there was one other face that they've kind of recognized as colleagues and a student at the same time. That's one by Yvonne Hauser. It's a charcoal sketch, so it shows difficult to preserve. We do have climate controlled vaults and so forth, so we do keep some of the stuff there. We used to have a full-time conservator, but it was just he and I working on the entire collection of, 550 plus schools, all these admin centers, all these political issues. So I tell you, he kind of shouldered the load with me way outside of conservation. But anyhow, this is a block print, and this is done by Mary Rynch, who was part of the team that did the World War II memorial at Jarvis. So she went on to to be a working artist, and she was very good at it, actually. And she was really smart. Her husband was really smart, because they had a student as well, and they got Mary and the student to put their initials in on the work that they had done on that mural. So it went down in kind of the art history record. Now, they're replacing the windows in that auditorium. And Joan, if you've been there, these are the murals, the North Atlantic ones, are above the windows on the east side of the building. So they were replacing those. So it became this huge job, because we had to actually take those murals off. So I know that we could take the other ones off as well. It's a complex style. We had to put it out to an outside conservation company to take it off. And they carefully removed it with a chemical, the adhesive layer in behind the canvas, and removed it, transported it to their studios, and are cleaning it. And as soon as the windows are replacement and all the interior work is done, we'll put those back up again. So interesting. But we got all the approvals for that, probably 2 years ago, and it's just happening now. So here's some of the plaster detail I was talking about. It happens to be in the boardroom that I was showing you. And once again, these column tops are very symbolic in masonry. There's gargoyles. We have our own gargoyles too. I had a woman actually write a book called Faces in the Sky. I think it was very close to a Stephen King title. And she researched all the gargoyles that were in our older downtown buildings, and some of the bas relief materials that went into our urban or our suburban boards later. But she painstakingly went through everything. And at the schools, it wasn't too bad. But she would have to get permission downtown for buildings across the street from the building she wanted to take photographs of. Because, of course, if she got permission to go into the building and take that gargoyle, she'd have to precariously lean outside of the window. So it was a lot of diplomacy that, she'd have to get in to people's office space and so forth to be able to shoot the photographs out the window. So she was very happy she could get all the work done. And I love that, because I don't have time to sit and research our gargoyles, and I would love to be able to do it. But partnering with high-end researchers like that, they teach me about the collection. I provide them access and so forth, but they're able to get into the nitty-gritty, and actually I use a lot of their work. There's a couple more. I'm not sure what they represent on a school. And then often there were crests involved with the school construction as well. What time is it? Okay. We're getting there. This is a beautiful piece. Unfortunately, it's a black and white representation of it. It's a stained glass suspended ceiling at Central High School of Commerce, or the old Central Commerce, where Voden worked and collected a bunch of stuff. Well, this is in their main auditorium, and so it hangs above you, and that's just one portion. It's beautiful. And people from lighting organizations in the United States have actually come on tours because of the way that that's suspended. And the electrical systems that were up in behind it. I've been up on the catwalk, laying on my belly, looking at all this stuff, mainly because a student, that one bad apple concept, didn't get something he wanted toward the end of school. And he went into that room and just in anger, he had his combination lock, because he'd taken it off his locker, and he pitched it up and he put it right through one of those panels, which was a real drag, because it was right there, very evident near the stage. And I felt very badly, because I was dragged into the principal's office because I happened to go over there later that afternoon. And finally, the principal had found out who the kid was and ended up making me be kind of the disciplinarian, like the bad cop, and it wasn't a pleasant situation. And the kid was so sorry and was apologetic and everything else. So I tried to do what I could for him, but it didn't end well, I don't think, for him. But the student council heard about it, knew that I was some guy from head office that looked after the art. The principal was mad that the kid had broken that, and they actually came to the principal's office, and then they lobbied me in a letter asking me not to remove any of the art from their school due to one student. They raised the money to repair it, and they were trying to show that they really cared about their art. And just because one person did that, it wasn't what the whole school felt about their art. So I was really moved by it. So we got in touch with a glazier, and he happened to know heritage glass because it's quite different. And when you suspend stained glass, and John Joseph knows more about this, given his dissertation and his work at various churches, glass is liquid. So it starts to, after time, sort of ooze down and get thicker at the bottom than at the top. Well, in the suspended one, gravity's pulling on it in a different way. So it's really quite unique. So what this glazier did, because we were up on top of it looking at all this stuff, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So he decided to go to the end of the room where you came in, and he took a panel, like one of these smaller panels from there, and took it to the front where the kid had broken it and inserted it there, and had to put a clear one in there. But he balanced it in the design so it looked kind of like it fit there a bit. And I thought, wow, this is a great idea, because once again, like the dais in that room that you come in and you're facing the west, you have to turn around to see the main feature. How many people walk into an auditorium and immediately look up? But they will look up to above the stage. So it was just smoke and mirrors, and it was a quick way to keep the integrity of the piece while not causing a lot of grief to that student's parents and so forth, having to pay for some sort of heritage glass. Because once again, glass has different ages, and I've learned an awful lot with the York Memorial stained glass rebuild with Eva. You can't just put old glass and old glass together. There's different types, there's different companies, there's different, blends, and it becomes quite an art form to repair stained glass. Okay. War memorials. This is at Harvard Collegiate. Charles Hill is the sculptor of this. You'll actually note that there's no bayonet on the top of that. That's because it's a metal bayonet that sticks way out, and kids snap it off all the time. So you can see this is kind of winter. There's some slush and so forth here. We've now built a wall around it. We've put a bunch of things that prevent skateboarders from being able to have any fun there, but people still climb it, and they go off and they hang on that and they break it off. It becomes a huge deal because there's no money, so we have to raise money, and then the community's like, didn't we raise money for that 8 years ago? And so it's a real problem. The fellow, the sculptor, is well known, and he's well known for war memorials. But with my work at the TDSB, I realized that war memorials are not often unique. Most of them, like a lot of them are, but not all of them. And you can buy that, or you could have bought that from a sculpture company catalog created by this man, but in that format. After the First World War, when the whole idea of the soldiers not coming back in the big graveyards, community started to really pull together for big memorials and that kind of thing. And so I think it's in Wyerton. There's a very similar, if not this. No. But there's another one up on the Bruce Peninsula, a small town that has that same one in their community. Joanne's also recalling another thing here, which is in the next one. This is the war memorial at Harvard, or not Harvard, Malvern Collegiate down in the beach. And once again, a World War I war memorial. He's supposed to have a sword in this hand, and it continually gets broken off. This was redone a number of years ago. It used to sit flat on the ground, but I don't have another picture of it, sorry. But it's actually sitting on an elevated platform outside a window in the library. And if you can imagine that about 8 feet on either side of that, of the photo, it curves, the building curves in sort of like a half cupola kind of thing. And there's a book of remembrance and a dedicated dictionary on stands right behind this. So originally the plan was the students could look and then look out. It's a very modern design. It's done with I-beams and concrete. It doesn't match the window, and it certainly doesn't match the sculpture. Real bit of a drag though, because there's a school down the street, another high school, and they're from the separate school board. And there's been a rivalry between Malvern and this school for years. And one of the things that they do is put toilet paper around this guy, or they do other things. And one year we got involved in a restoration project, and this time I was smart, and I actually paid the stone carver to make 2 of those swords, and then a foam replica, so that another stone worker can carve it from the foam model, because it's broken again. It's in my career, it's broken 4 times, I would say. So one time we were trying to get all this work done. We were getting security cameras, lights, and so forth. And there was a member of the community, his kids didn't even go to the school anymore, who thought we were not going through the process as quickly. And, you know, the speed of the bureaucracy around heritage issues at the school board, unless it's like a politically incorrect thing, the speed's glacial. It takes forever. So he didn't like that. His father was a World War II vet. So he brought his dad in his outfit with his medals and got a Toronto Sun photographer to get this on the front page of the Toronto Sun with the veteran looking up with a tear in his eye and so forth. And so suddenly there was all this, you know, grief at head office, and we accelerated the project, but it was a bit of a drag because we were working very diligently on it, and it wasn't the black eye we needed in the media. However, we carried on, we got all the work done, and we were going to have the Minister of Defense come. There were a whole bunch of political leaders that were coming. There were Legion people, and we were revealing it on November 11th. Well, the kids from Neil McNeil didn't realize they were coming home from a hockey game, thought, hey, look at it, they've got it all fixed up. And they went over and they trashed it with blue hockey tape. They climbed up, breaking some of the letters on the way up. Fortunately, they fell. We were able to recover them all, and they were only bent. They weren't snapped, the little pegs that fit into the stone. And the sword, thank heavens, wasn't broken, but they had all this blue tape. And when I was a kid, hockey tape was sticky, but now there's a sort of tape that sticks onto itself. So when the conservator and I looked at it and we're like, oh, 2 days before the 11th, oh, we're done for. And then it was actually quite easy to get the stuff off, but we had to rework the letters, re-glue them and so forth. And when we opened that thing, the glue was still wet on those letters that had fallen off. And of course, the conservator, you know, he was so worried that one was going to slip out, right? And I would say, well, you know, I'm the politician, so I'll just go over and step on it until after the ceremony. No one will notice, right? But you know, he was very careful with all of it. And it was a great restoration, but unfortunately, it's a repeating thing. And they've got cameras on it now. They've got a motion activated light, and still, you know, unless this TDSB security is right on the school property, the kids can do whatever they want with it and carry on without getting caught. And then this is the War Memorial at Central Technical School. And this is actually not the War Memorial. And Central Tech turned 100 in 1915. That's when it opened for students. Cornerstone dates to 1913. However, after the war, they decided to get a war memorial together. So they asked people, and it was a highly skilled technical staff that were there. So this guy, just before that, going back to this one, this is sculpted by Emmanuel Hahn. And Emmanuel Hahn eventually got fired from the school board and was not allowed to have any of his work anymore because of the anti-German sentiment after the First World War and then moving into the Second World War. It turns out he was also the fellow that sculpted what eventually became the image of the blue nose on the Canadian dime. So that's his other claim to fame. And that's not the identical one. Yeah, Joanne is right. That other one, this one, we went down to a small town outside of her hometown of Sarnia, and that's where they have the exact same one. So we were able to take photographs, and they have it enclosed better, and it's in a more respected. Alveston. Watford? Okay, it was in Watford, Ontario. And they had the bayonet, so we were able to take accurate measurements and photographs and so forth, which the sculptor was able to use. But once again, carbon copy of it. That one, not a carbon copy. This one, definitely not a carbon copy. Now, more stories about this if you want them. That wasn't the winner, if you can believe it. This is very much the motif of war memorials after the First World War and so forth. I love it. It came second place. And this is actually a maquette. It's not a real, and if you saw it, it looks like bronze. It's the color of bronze. There's some patina on it and stuff. It's cleverly painted. It's plaster. And the guy had only made the maquette, and he was going to then make the sculpture if he won the competition. One of the teachers at Central Tech. Turned out everybody went to a memorial organ, and they bought this memorial organ and they put it in their now defunct auditorium. So this was up in a hallway for years. And then they ended up bringing it down into the front foyer, and there's a little chain around it, and the King and Country War Memorial panels on the side, honor rolls. So it's quite nice, but everybody thinks that it's bronze. And so that thumb you see on the warrior right there is actually the cast of the conservator's thumb. It was supposed to be my thumb, but my thumb was too big when we ended up putting it back together. So the forearm as well, I think on this part, is one of the sculpture teachers from about 8 years ago, because someone had hit it, and the students think it's metal. So I don't really blame them, because they'll lean on it or something, imagining that it's firm, and it's hollow plaster. So that's that guy's forearm that was redone. So yeah, kind of an interesting story. And now as I'm moving in there more, I'm going to put more exhibition stuff in this front foyer, and I'll bring this piece to life a little bit more, I think. What else can I show you guys? Oh, this is for Joan. This is part of the Explorers of Canada murals at Jarvis. So, right there, not such a good thing. And this can be interpreted as whatever you want. This is up at the front, patriotism. It's on the one side of the auditorium. And then on the other side, this is sacrifice. Sorry, it's in black and white. It's in color, as beautiful as this. This is one of the problems, another problem at the board, one of those issues I was talking about. Down below, there's a staircase, right? Can you see? The staircase would be about here. It goes up onto the stage. And right along here, just below where the picture is, there's plexiglass. Great, they've protected the bottom of the painting where people go up and down with graduation dresses, all sorts of different things. But, the guy that did it had a work order, said attach plexiglass to this portion. So it is just drilled right through the plexiglass, right through the artwork, right into the plaster wall.
Ugh.
So sometimes it's a drag when I have to be on site. And that's what's been good about the window replacement, is that I've been along on that project, all the important parts of it. So that's kind of good. So just to go through more, there's a detail of patriotism. Once again, not very diverse, but the community that they were reflecting at that point wasn't very diverse either. Odd that the children, some of them are barefooted. Here's some more of some of the French explorers coming. This is the only time you see Indigenous people above them, which is sort of interesting. See here, this is more of the motif of the Indigenous, and then the other people. Once again, cross, and so forth here in the ships. And then of course here, this is another end piece, which once again doesn't represent the people beyond a colonial view. And then we're back to the World War II memorial. What else do we want to see? Oh, do I have to wrap it up? I guess I should.
Just think about, final images.
Final images. This goes on forever, guys. It really does. It's sort of crazy. I think I've hit everything I've really wanted to show you guys today. So if you have time, I can answer questions, and that's our new logo. We still use the apple, but this is to represent more diversity in our board. I don't really see a lot of sense in that, but there they are.
Greg,
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure.
And one day I'll email you and just email you a ton of questions. But there's a new school that's going to be opening up possibly next year at Davisville and Young. They tore it down.
Yeah.
And it used to be also partly a school for the deaf. Is there going to be artwork there?
I don't know yet. It's a huge hot political potato. The board got into a lot of trouble, and and the city too fast-tracked the demolition process. It's a very particular building and I've done documentation of it, photo documentation. I brought in another professional building architecture photographer to highlight it. They moved along quickly. A number of different people in the architecture community got up in arms about it. They tried to protest it. Both the board and the city were going forward. They've done one of the condo developments and so forth. All the kids moved out to Vaughan Road Academy. We had to replicate that for elementary kids because it's a high school. So fountains, toilets, emerging, everything has to be changed. So and then that school is going to house other schools. But Davisville is behind schedule. There was a guy named Alec Bukowski, I think it is, from the Globe and Mail. He's the architecture critic. Really rough edge guy, but heart of gold. And I've worked with him, and he was on that committee to save Davisville. And I worked really hard. I've actually got chunks of the office cut out of the ceiling and the electrical systems, off the floor, out of the metalwork on the side, because we want to rebuild it sometime in an exhibition. It was a very particular type of design by a very particular architect that worked at the board for a number of years. And it would have worked, but you remember it. It had the kind of castle-y top.
I remember.
And I was up on that roof, and they were supposed to purchase a membrane. There had to be a certain membrane to work with the wicking of the water flow, because all these things came down to a gutter. Well, the board cut corners and they didn't put in the membrane. So basically from the first rainfall after it opened, they've been fighting water issues and so forth. The other thing is there's very small windows in that building. At the time, that was the educational deal with light. They wanted them high, they wanted them small. So the light would come in, but it wasn't a distraction, a visual distraction for the students looking out the windows. So that was like an innovative design at the time. But of course now it's get back to nature, get big windows, get the kids looking out, fresh air, all that type of thing. And then also there was the Metropolitan School for the Deaf. So that was one of the schools that the Metropolitan School Board administered.
Exactly.
Because of such a special program.
That's right.
Yeah. So in there, very nice setup, but the rooms were designed for smaller groups. So it was sort of 4 to 5 students with an instructor. They also had a lot of classes that have that two-way glass, so observers could sit in behind in a small room, often with the parents, because they were doing such innovative work. Kids were learning and the parents didn't believe them. And so they would actually bring the parents in to see the kid signing, because the kid wouldn't sign at home, scared of the parent, and all sorts of different things. So the rooms are too small. And so they would have to blow out all sorts of walls. And unfortunately, in that part of the school, it's one of those designs where almost every wall is a supporting wall, because it was like they put a cell of concrete room down the way. So if you start to break out interior walls, you have to start to do a lot of reshoring and so forth. So when you look in behind it, there were reasons why it had to go. The way that it happened was abhorrent. And unfortunately, I was a bit of the public face with this architecture group. It's the same trustee. She still gives us the same gears. I bumped into that columnist the other day over by Central Tech. He lives there. He was trying to get some comment, and she's just ignoring him again. So she's wrapped up in the politics of it. So I'm going to stay there quietly, and I will put more art in if they want. There was very little art by the end of it, but there was an extensive war memorial, and the important part was actually the structure. The building was the artifact.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Greg, I'm just going to stop recording, but keep talking.